Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.
Welcome into room 442. A very exciting time to be a Manchester United fan. And here today, I'm very lucky to have Samuel Luckhurst, the chief writer for the Manchester United Evening News. Samuel, thank you so much for joining us. We were just speaking off air about how tricky and exciting maybe of a time it is to be a United fan with the season winding down, Liverpool just a point behind them and hoping for UCL contention.
Thank you very much for having me, first of all. Yes, it looked like it was a fait accompli not too long ago that United would be in the Champions League next season, but their away form has been pretty dreadful. Even against West Ham at the weekend, they were coming up against a bottom seven team, having beaten the other bottoms seven teams away from home, but they lost that one. So that's an issue that is never really going to get addressed this season. They've only got one more away game, and that's probably the saving grace for them. Of those four remaining fixtures, three of them are at home, and their home form has been excellent. They've only dropped, I think, 5 points all season at Old Trafford. The only defeat was against Brighton on the opening weekend. So that does give supporters some comfort, but they still need I think it's 3 wins from the last four to be absolutely certain of qualifying for the Champions League. And as you said, Liverpool are breathing down their necks. They're only a point behind. They've won their last 6 in the Premier League. They don't look like they're going to drop points either. So United have really got to regain form as soon as possible now. They've got Wolves at home on Saturday, and Wolves are already assured of safety, having looked a bit iffy for a large portion of the season regarding the possibility of relegation. But still, the way United are performing at the moment, there's not immense confidence among the fan base that they are going to get the job done. It's there has been a very there's been a shift in mood really regarding the team in the last couple of months, and there is a danger that their season might end up peaking in February, because of course that's when they beat Barcelona in the Europa League, and then a few days later they won the League Cup, and that has set them up for what should or could still be a very successful end to the season. But there are a few more pessimistic supporters around at the moment.
Is it fair to say that there was just a bit of a dip with United with not only form but injuries ever since that Sevilla loss? I feel like most people watching United could see that there was a shift in the way they played. Of course, Marcus Rashford getting injured and then losing Lisandro Martinez and Rafael Varane. It was all around the same time, and it was just maybe too big of a hit for Eric Ten Hag and United to bounce back and continue at that level that they were playing at.
It's a salient point, particularly given how that Sevilla game went in the first leg, and that they were 2-0 up with 80 minutes played. They only had 10 minutes, 15 minutes max left on the clock, and they end up drawing that 2-2. And then the return leg, it was a complete disaster, losing it 3-0 against a Sevilla side who, frankly, are not very good side. They were 13th in La Liga at that time. They've got this great pedigree in the Europa League, and you should never underestimate that. But United should have won that tie very comfortably, but they went from being 2-0 up after 80 minutes in the first leg to losing it 5-2 on aggregate. And of course, the losses of Lisandro Martinez and Rafael Varane have been very keenly felt. Although Victor Lindelof and Luke Shaw have done well, and Shaw in particular as a left back playing as an auxiliary centre back, he's done extremely well this season. It's easy to forget that that's not his natural position. But Martinez has had such a huge impact on that team, not just from his quality, but his character as well. And there are times watching him that he's as much of an asset in attack as he is in defence, because his distribution is so good. He can break the lines with his passes. He can accelerate attacks with these probing passes that find teammates in space higher up the pitch. Varane is one of the most esteemed centre backs of the last 10 or 15 years, and his impact in the defence this season has been immense, because it was when he came back into the team for the Liverpool game in August that Martinez all of a sudden showed what he was capable of, and the naysayers were quietened that night with that victory after what were two pretty galling, a couple of galling first 2 games for Lisandro Martinez. And with Rashford, although his injury wasn't as bad as it may have looked at the time when he came off against Everton, and he did miss a few games. He has come back, but his goal scoring record of late, the goals have dried up a little bit. I think he's only got 5 in his last 17. And this is a team that really does struggle to get goals. You only have to look at United's goal difference this season and the goals scored. It's extremely meagre for a team. I mean, you mentioned Manchester United, and you expect them to be one of the highest scorers in the league, and particularly for the money they've spent as well, they should be one of the highest scorers in the league. But it's not worked out that way this season, and they do have this tendency of, just kind of like remaking the same film of having a lot of chances in games, not taking them, and then being punished. And that's exactly what happened against Brighton and West Ham last week.
Yeah, is it fair to say that in the off season, Manchester United really need to go after a proper striker? I know there's links to allegedly Harry Kane, Victor Osimhen of Napoli, but it is a difficult time for United when they have a player like Marcus Rashford, who they're so heavily reliant on to score goals that when he's injured, you really feel that key player missing.
Absolutely. And Kane is the preferred target, but as you will well know, dealing with Daniel Levy, it's not something that you take lightly. And Manchester United haven't signed a player from Tottenham in nearly 15 years. And Dimitar Berbatov, that deal, it was a club record deal. And that went down to the wire. It was only when Berbatov was being guided through the corridors of Old Trafford around about midnight, and the lights were on, and there were some fans outside, that they realised that that deal was actually happening. Levy drives a hard bargain. He very rarely oversees sales to direct rivals. The only exception in recent years would have been Kyle Walker to Manchester City in 2017. I think that was a record fee for a fullback at the time. And given Kane's situation, and his quality still, and okay, he's out of contract next year, but he's still one of the best strikers in the world. You are looking at about £100 million for a 29-year-old. There are a lot of United fans that would say don't do it because of his age, because of the wear and tear accrued over a decade of playing in the Premier League. That Victor Osimhen, although he might actually command a higher fee than Harry Kane, he's the younger striker. He's possibly more dynamic. United would certainly have a longer shelf life out of him. But whoever that striker is, they need to sign one. Ten Hag likes a couple of other options. I mean, Gonçalo Ramos had a breakthrough moment at the World Cup when he scored a hat-trick after he took Cristiano Ronaldo's place. And I think when Ten Hag first encountered him with Ajax against Benfica, he was playing as a number 10 because Darwin Núñez was playing as a number 9. So he's somewhat reinvented himself at Benfica this season. Mohamed Kudus, who scored a couple of goals for Ghana at the World Cup, Ten Hag knows from his Ajax days. So there are a few options out there. I think there are going to be a few big clubs in the summer that are going to be in the market for top draw strikers. I mean, Chelsea certainly need a striker and have got a lot of money to play with. Bayern Munich will probably still need a striker. Lewandowski went in the summer. They've not directly replaced him. I think it would be very convenient for Daniel Levy if they were to come in for Harry Kane. And if Harry Kane fancied moving to a big club like Bayern Munich and having a good chance of winning the Champions League, that would certainly suit Daniel Levy, because then you avoid selling him to a domestic rival. But it's not just a quick fix with United. As pressing a need as the striker is, it seems like there's another position that comes up every week, which is becoming a more pressing need. I mean, they certainly need a younger midfielder, and Ten Hag does want a younger midfielder. They're looking at bringing a better right back in. There's a chance that one of the senior centre-backs will, one of the reserve ones, I should say, Victor Lindelof or Harry Maguire, there's a chance one of them will go in the summer. So in which case you need to bring another one in. And there's quite a lot of uncertainty in goal as well. There are a few goalkeepers are out of contract in the summer, mainly peripheral goalkeepers, but even the number 1 at the moment, although it looks like David De Gea is going to sign a new contract, there is uncertainty over his role because his form has fallen off a cliff.
Yeah, actually, let's talk about David De Gea for a little bit, because I saw over the weekend you wrote about how, of course, that massive mistake against West Ham just wasn't acceptable. But Ten Hag came out and supported his keeper publicly, standing with him, which I think is fantastic. But there's a lot of skeptics when it comes to David De Gea, especially of late, against Sevilla as well. We saw some mistakes, but he's still one of the best keepers, I think, of this generation, as well as he's only 32, which for a keeper is quite young. Is that not something that Manchester United and Erik ten Hag would focus on? The fact that not only has he been there for his entire career, basically, but the fact that he still has a decent, couple years left as a keeper.
It's certainly something that has come into the thinking, and I completely agree with you. 32 for a goalkeeper is young, and De Gea has been one of the best, but you have to be judged on what you're doing rather than what you've done. And when was the last time he was a truly world-class goalkeeper? You're probably going back 4 or 5 years ago, even. I mean, 4 years ago, he was having a dreadful time in United's run-in under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and he got a new contract in the summer. So there's a chance that history is going to repeat itself. Although he made a dreadful mistake at the weekend, ironically, in the two previous occasions United came up against West Ham this season, he was one of their match winners. He made important saves in the league win and in the FA Cup win. But those performances, which I mean, they used to be on a monthly basis when De Gea was at his absolute zenith, they're few and far between these days. He's not actually had a disastrous season. He's done okay, and I suppose it feels a little bit paradoxical that he's top of the clean sheet table in the Premier League. He's got 15 clean sheets. That's two more than Nick Pope, and I suspect a lot of the footballers, when it comes to voting their team this season, they'll probably go with Pope because he has had a pretty good season in his first season at Newcastle, and Newcastle look like they're going to qualify for the Champions League as well. But that clean sheet record that De Gea has got, that is as much down to the United defenders as it is to him. Martinez and Varane have had very good seasons. So has Luke Shaw. Prior to the World Cup, Diogo Dalot would have contributed to a number of those clean sheets because he was in really good form for United. He's not been in particularly good form this calendar year. He doesn't seem to have truly recovered from an injury sustained at the World Cup with Portugal. And even Tyrell Malacia, whose form has tailed off quite a lot in the opening weeks of the season, some of his performances contributed to clean sheets. So that has been a collective effort. And with De Gea, when you boil it down to the individual, if he's not at his optimum when it comes to shot stopping, there's not a lot about him in this era with goalkeepers. In the last 5 years, he has been eclipsed by Alisson and Edison in the Premier League. I think the Sevilla game, the 3-0 defeat, all of those goals exposed shortcomings in his game. The first one, he's bad at passing. The second one, he's not commanding at set pieces. And the third one, more often than not, he's a bit of a disaster when he does dare go outside of his area, and he very rarely does that. So it's not really, it shouldn't be a quandary for United. I think a lot of United supporters, and they'd have said this before the error at the weekend, they'd have said just release him and get a fresh face in goal next season. The trouble is, because United want a striker, they want a midfielder, they will possibly need a centre back as well. The last thing they want to be doing in a summer, having had a summer last year, which was the start of the rebuild, is pretty much buying a whole new spine of the team. You do not want to be signing a new striker and a new goalkeeper in the same summer. It just doesn't suit them, irrespective of the ownership situation. So it seems like they're going to kick that can down the road. But the other issue is that they've still got Dean Henderson on the books. What do they do with him? He's a 26-year-old. He's not really a young man anymore as a goalkeeper. He's played enough games in his professional career, but he is a man in a hurry. He's not got his chance at United as a number one, and he is one of the most sellable assets in the squad. And to meet the profitability and the sustainability rules of the Premier League, United are going to have to be a lot more proactive with outgoings in the summer. And so Henderson is a prime candidate to sell. But are Manchester United possibly weakening themselves in goal if they're going to keep De Gea there? But that said, as you alluded to earlier, I wrote earlier in the week, and colleagues have subsequently written similar stories as well, that there is uncertainty at United over whether De Gea will have that number one status next season. But who that number one may be, whether it's an internal candidate or an external candidate, that remains to be seen.
So we can expect potentially a lot of movement in the summer transfer window for United, maybe for the
Always.
better, maybe for the worse. One thing I have to ask you before we wrap up, obviously fighting for UCL contention, but also June 3rd, a massive match against city rivals, Manchester City in the FA Cup final. What is more important to Manchester United here? Finishing in the top 4 for next season or getting that FA Cup trophy?
I think if you had, if you were to hold a gun to a fan's head, they would probably say the FA Cup, because that is one final that they are not going to want to lose. Certainly in my lifetime, it's the most eagerly anticipated FA Cup final. I think there's so much at stake there, particularly if City win the Premier League and if they overcome Real Madrid in the second leg and they're on for the treble. It adds spice to the occasion. Never mind that it's a Manchester derby being held in London, that it's the first all Manchester Cup final. There is so much at stake going into that game, irrespective of what happens with the league with United. But I suspect the people at the top of the club, if they had to choose, if they were in that position, they would say qualify for the Champions League, because that does wonders for the asset sheets, for the balance sheets, for the club's revenue as well, and supporters as well. Obviously, United have been in the Europa League again this season. The difference between being in the Champions League and the Europa League, there are certain supporters like that, they won't go to the games. They're not as fussed about watching Manchester United in the Europa League group stage, whereas if it's Champions League, they are completely engaged by it, because there's a romance with that competition and the club. Even though United have only won it 3 times, the European Cup, it's synonymous with the Busby Babes and the tragedy of the Munich air disaster in 1958, and then the triumph of winning it 10 years later at Wembley. So that would be an extremely tricky one if you were to put it to a Manchester United fan. I think they would probably do their utmost not to give you a straight answer on
it. That's fair enough. Well, I mean, there's a lot to look forward to here with Manchester United. Couple games left. Title race is on, and so is UCL contention. But thank you so much for joining me, Samuel Luckhurst of the Manchester United Evening News. June 3rd is the FA Cup final with Manchester United and Manchester City. But before that, United are back in action this weekend against Julian Lopetegui's Wolves.
Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.